A man sits in exile, his body broken from torture, his career destroyed, his name about to become synonymous with evil for the next 5 centuries. Niccolò Machiavelli had committed no crime. He had simply written down what he observed about human nature. For this, he was tortured, banned, and condemned by every moral authority in Europe. The Catholic Church placed his writings on the index of forbidden books. But here is what matters. Machiavelli was not condemned because he was wrong. He was condemned because he was correct. And as you know, the truth always have enemies to it. He documented patterns of human behavior that everyone recognizes but no one wants to admit. And the most dangerous part of his observations had nothing to do with statecraft or warfare. It had everything to do with the person sleeping next to you, the friend you trust, the family member you sacrifice for. Once you understand what Machiavelli actually observed about human loyalty and self-interest, you will never see your relationships the same way again. This is not motivation, this is a diagnosis. Machiavelli wrote this in The Prince. Men are ungrateful, fickle, false, cowardly, covetous, and as long as you succeed, they are yours entirely. They will offer you their blood, property, life, and children when the need is far distant, but when it approaches, they turn against you. Notice your reaction to this sentence. Notice the immediate resistance. Notice the voice in your head saying, "This is too cynical. This doesn't describe everyone. My relationships are different." This resistance is not evidence that Machiavelli was wrong. This resistance is evidence that he was right. The statement threatens something you need to believe. It suggests that the loyalty you depend on is conditional, that the love you trust is circumstantial, that the support you count on exists only as long as you provide value. Machiavelli included himself in this observation. He had been tortured by people who once praised him, abandoned by allies who once depended on him, forgotten by a republic he had served with complete dedication. He was not theorizing, he was reporting. Imagine losing everything tomorrow. Not gradually. Suddenly, your income disappears, your status vanishes, your health fails, your usefulness to others ends. Now count how many people would remain. Be honest, not who you hope would remain. Who would actually remain when there is no benefit to staying? When association with you becomes inconvenient? When supporting you requires sacrifice with no return? If your list is short, this is not a condemnation of those who would leave. It is a diagnosis of how human attachment actually functions. People do not stay because of history. They do not stay because of promises. They stay because the relationship continues to serve their interests. When the exchange stops working, attachment dissolves. This is not a character flaw. This is human nature. Loyalty is not a bond. Loyalty is a calculation. Think of someone who was once close to you but is no longer present in your life. Someone who simply stopped calling, stopped initiating, stopped prioritizing you. What changed? Did your circumstances shift? Did you stop being useful in some way? Did you stop providing validation, entertainment, status, emotional support, or practical assistance? The standard explanation is that people grow apart, that lives get busy. This explanation protects everyone's self-image. It allows both parties to avoid acknowledging what actually happened. What actually happened is this: the exchange became unbalanced. One person was giving more than they were receiving, or one person stopped providing what the other needed. The relationship ceased to be mutually beneficial, and so it ended, not because anyone was evil, but because human attachment follows utility. This is not unusual, this is the norm. Consider romantic relationships. A couple meets, attraction is intense, time passes. One partner becomes completely available. They sacrifice their independence. They prioritize the other person above everything. They remove all mystery. They eliminate all distance, and the other partner loses interest. Not because they are shallow, but because complete availability destroys value. When a person becomes entirely predictable, when they require nothing for themselves, when they exist only as an extension of their partner's needs, they cease to be a separate individual. They become a utility. And utilities are not desired, they are used. Machiavelli observed this dynamic in political alliances. He who makes himself a beast gets rid of the pain of being a man. Translation: when you erase your boundaries, your autonomy, and your separateness, you become convenient but not respected, used but not valued. Family relationships are supposed to be unconditional. This is the core illusion. Think of a family member who contacts you only when they need assistance, money, childcare, emotional support. They do not call to check in, they do not call to give, they call to extract. Why do they behave this way? Because it works. Because you allow it. Because you have been trained to believe that setting boundaries with family is selfish. But here is the truth. Relationships without reciprocity are not relationships. They are exploitation. And exploitation continues as long as it carries no consequences. 3 core truths govern all human relationships. First truth: people remain in relationships because the relationship serves their interests. This interest can be financial, emotional, social, sexual, practical, or psychological, but it is always present. When the interest disappears, attachment disappears. This does not mean people are incapable of love. It means love itself is conditional. Love is the emotional response to a person who meets needs. When needs are no longer met, love fades. The practical implication: if you want someone to stay, you must continue providing value, not manipulatively, but realistically. If you become a burden with no corresponding benefit, people will distance themselves. If you give endlessly, without enforcing reciprocity, you will be taken for granted and eventually discarded. This is why people who sacrifice everything for others are often treated worst. They have made themselves too available. They have eliminated their own value. Second truth: human beings test limits. When poor treatment carries no consequences, it escalates. When boundaries are enforced consistently, respect follows. Machiavelli wrote, "Since love and fear can hardly exist together, if we must choose between them, it is far safer to be feared than loved." This has been misunderstood for centuries. Machiavelli was not advocating cruelty. He was observing that relationships based purely on affection without consequences are unstable. Consider a relationship where one person tolerates disrespect, broken promises, and poor treatment without consequence. What happens? The poor treatment increases, not because the other person is evil, but because boundaries that are not enforced do not exist. Now consider a relationship where boundaries are clear and enforced. Disrespect results in distance. Broken promises result in lost trust. What happens? The behavior stops. Not because the person becomes moral, but because they adjust to the reality of the relationship. People do not respect those who have no limits. They respect those who enforce consequences. Third truth: complete availability destroys value. When a person loses independence, mystery, and scarcity, they cease to be attractive or respected. They become a utility. The person who is always available, always responsive, always prioritizing others, becomes psychologically invisible, not because people are shallow, but because human attention is drawn to scarcity and autonomy. Human psychology assigns value based on scarcity. When something is always available, its perceived worth decreases. When something requires effort to access, its perceived worth increases. This is not conscious, this is automatic. The practical implication: maintain independence. Maintain your own life. Maintain boundaries around your time, energy, and availability. Not to manipulate, not to play games, but because a person without independence is not attractive or respected, they are convenient. The transformation requires 5 steps. First, conduct a relationship audit. For each significant relationship, ask, what am I giving? What am I receiving? Is this exchange balanced? Use behavior as data, not hope or guilt. Second, enforce boundaries. If someone treats you poorly, create distance. If someone takes without giving, stop giving. Watch what happens. Some people will adjust. Others will complain that you have changed. These are people who valued what you provided, not who you are. Third, maintain independence. Do not make any person or relationship the center of your existence. When you have your own life, you are not dependent on any single relationship for validation or survival. Fourth, optimize for respect, not affection. Respect produces consistent good treatment. Affection without respect produces exploitation. Fifth, accept the transactional nature of relationships. Relationships are exchanges. People stay because they benefit. Acknowledging this is not cynicism, it is realism. And realism allows you to build relationships that actually function. The objections are predictable. This is too cynical. Not all relationships are transactional. I have people in my life who would help me no matter what. Test this belief. When you actually needed help, who helped? When your circumstances changed, who remained? If you have people who meet this standard, notice, even those relationships involve exchange. Maybe not financial exchange, but emotional exchange. The exchange of being needed, of feeling valuable. The exchange exists. It is simply more subtle. If I start thinking this way, I'll become cold and manipulative. The opposite is true. People who deny the transactional nature of relationships are easier to manipulate because they cannot recognize when they are being exploited. They stay in destructive relationships because they believe love should be unconditional. People who acknowledge reality can enforce boundaries, can recognize exploitation, can build relationships based on reciprocity rather than hope. This is not cold. This is functional. Machiavelli sits in exile, tortured, banned, condemned. His name will become synonymous with evil for centuries, but his observations will survive. Because they are accurate. He offered a choice, not between good and evil, between illusion and reality. Most people choose illusion. They cling to the belief that loyalty is unconditional, that love is permanent. They are repeatedly disappointed, repeatedly betrayed, repeatedly confused about why relationships fail. A small number of people choose reality. They acknowledge that loyalty is conditional, that love requires reciprocity. They enforce boundaries. They maintain independence. They build relationships based on exchange rather than expectation. These people are not more cynical. They are less vulnerable. They are not less loving. They are less exploited. They are not manipulative. They are functional. Machiavelli was not condemned because he was evil. He was condemned because he documented what people already knew but refused to admit, that humans are self-interested, that loyalty is conditional, that relationships require value, that affection without consequences produces exploitation. 5 centuries later, people still resist these observations, still call them cynical, still insist their relationships are different, and 5 centuries later, people still experience the same patterns. The friend who disappears, the partner who loses interest, the family member who only calls when they need something. The pattern does not change, because human nature does not change. What changes is whether you recognize the pattern or remain confused by it. Machiavelli did not create these dynamics. He observed them, and observation is not corruption. Observation is clarity. The question is whether you prefer comfortable illusions or uncomfortable reality. Both are available. One produces repeated disappointment, the other produces agency. This is not advice. This is a description of how human relationships actually function. What you do with this information is your choice, but once you see the pattern, you cannot unsee it. Every relationship you observe, every interaction you experience, every loyalty that fails or succeeds, the mechanism is visible, and visibility changes everything.